Most of the examples that have been presented thus far have involved cross-sectional data, or data gathered from many observations, all taken at the same time. However, if you have time series data that are measured over time, we can employ line charts or scatter diagrams. A line chart is a two-dimensional chart showing time on a horizontal axis and the variable of interest on the vertical axis. A scatter diagram is a two-dimensional graph of plotted points in which the vertical axis represents values of one quantitative variable and the horizontal axis represents values of another quantitative variable. Here's a simple example of annual sales for a building company. The year variable is plotted on the x-axis and the mobile home sales is plotted on the y-axis. Go ahead and open Excel file flood and we'll construct a line chart. Here we have flood insurance coverage by year. Since we want year to be on the x-axis, I will usually put it on the left side of my y variable, so the y variable is on the right. We can do a simple copy and paste to achieve that. Go ahead and highlight the data, insert. In this case, recommended charts is the easiest option. So there's your line chart. Again, you can format it as you wish. In section 2.1, we introduce a set of statistical procedures known as joint frequency distributions that allow for the decision maker to examine two variables at the same time. Another procedure used to study two quantitative variables simultaneously is a scatter diagram or a scatter plot. There are many situations in which we are interested in understanding the bivariate relationship between two quantitative variables. In this case, we'll have a dependent variable and an independent variable. The dependent variable is a variable whose values are thought to be a function of or dependent on the values of another variable called the independent variable. On a scatter plot, the dependent variable is placed on the y-axis and is often called the response variable. The independent variable is a variable whose values are thought to impact the values of the dependent variable. The independent variable or explanatory variable is often within the direct control of the decision maker. On a scatter plot, the independent variable or explanatory variable is graphed on the x-axis. For example, we may have two variables, volume per day and cost per day. In this case, cost per day is dependent on the volume per day. Here we plot cost per day against volume per day to achieve our scatter plot. To do an example, open Excel file airplanes and we'll construct a scatter plot. Here we want to illustrate the relationship between fuel consumption per hour and passenger capacity. In this case, fuel consumption is dependent on passenger capacity, so we will isolate the seats variable and fuel consumption variable. Here's our scatter plot for fuel consumption as a function of passenger capacity. Again, format as usual, but it's particularly important to label the axes when constructing a scatter plot.